This is a Boeing 737. You can find them all over the world, and they come in many different variants. This one is not that interesting because it is just an ordinary passenger version. But what if I told you that this very same plane had once been part of a secret Soviet spy mission? Well, today we will talk about an airline that operated these planes and the story of how it turned from a national pride to becoming a burden for the nation. Welcome to the channel. The airline, now known as Ukraine International Airlines, or UIA, started its life as a much smaller operation called APK Airlines. The airline was established in 1992, just a year after Ukraine's independence from the collapsing Soviet Union. In the beginning, the airline only had one single passenger aircraft, a Tu-136, which it used to fly between Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. In addition to that, they also flew cargo flights. Since the airline only had one plane, their routes were seasonal and only operated when there was enough demand for it. So, in the winter, the plane would be stored away somewhere in a hangar until spring arrived and the routes were back on. In total, Apex Airlines only operated 3 routes during their first year of operation. It was only in 1994 that they started to grow bigger. And by 1996, the airline was ready to expand outside of Ukraine. At that time, they began flying between Kyiv and Moscow. The following year, they added new routes to London and Berlin, marking their first destinations outside of the former Soviet Union. By 1998, the company had grown so big that it needed a new name. They changed their name to Ukraine International Airlines and also adopted the formula of Antares Airlines. Now, the main hub of the airline would be based out of Boryspil Airport near Kyiv. The airline continued to expand throughout the 1990s and even survived the economic crash of 2001. And by 2004, they had 11 destinations within Europe and Asia. During this time, they mainly focused on building up a strong business model rather than acquiring more airplanes. However, in 2005, that would change. After years of focusing on making the company profitable, they had saved up enough money to buy their first brand new jet airliner since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The first Boeing 737,373 for the airline arrived in 2005, and with it, they opened a new route between Kyiv and Istanbul. For the next decade, the airline continued to grow both its network and its fleet. During the 2008 financial crisis, they managed to stay afloat while many other airlines collapsed. In 2012, they took delivery of their first Embraer 190, and by 2013, they expanded to the Americas for the first time, opening a new route between Kyiv and New York. At the end of 2014, the airline group consisted of 3 operating airlines: Ukraine International Airlines, Aerosvit, and B&H Airlines. Together, they had 32 aircraft in their fleet. But sadly, the following year, the Russian aggression against Ukraine escalated, which led to the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 70 over the disputed Donbass region. The event caused a lot of tension between Russia and the West, and multiple sanctions were imposed on Russia. As a result, multiple airlines around the world decided to stop flying over Russian airspace, including Lufthansa. This meant that airlines that wanted to fly between Asia and Europe now had to take longer routes, increasing fuel costs. The management of UIA quickly recognized a new opportunity. Due to the tensions in the area, no one wanted to fly over Ukraine, but they offered to do it at a lower price. So the European companies could save some money by using Ukrainian airspace, which led to UIA forming a joint venture called Sky Ukraine with Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, and Latalish Airlines. The idea was that Lufthansa would refer traffic to UIA, which would then fly over Ukrainian airspace and onwards to their final destination. For example, a Lufthansa flight from Frankfurt to Beijing would instead continue as a UIA flight between Frankfurt and Kyiv, before continuing as a Lufthansa flight again onwards to Beijing. Not only did this help the other airlines save money, but it also helped UIA to increase their revenue by filling empty seats on their flight. However, in 2015, the Ukrainian government wanted to get even more involved in the operations of the airline. The state-owned company wanted to buy a controlling stake in UIA, which was met with resistance from the employees of the airline, who feared that their jobs would be cut and that the service levels would go down. The fear was that the Ukrainian government would use UIA as a tool for foreign policy instead of letting the professionals run the company. Eventually, the plan was scrapped and nothing came out of it. But the conflict with Russia was far from over. Over the next few years, Russia continued to attack Ukraine, and there was even talk of a Third World War. Because of the conflict, most airlines around the world decided to stay away from Ukrainian airspace. But this meant that UIA was in a monopoly position and could set high prices on the routes where they had to fly over Russia to reach their destination. This helped the company become profitable. And by 2019, the airline had grown to a fleet size of 40 aircraft with destinations in Asia, Africa, America, and Europe. However, the airline's good fortune would soon come to an end. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which caused the country to close its airspace. This meant that UIA had to round its entire fleet of 40 aircraft before the war. They were flying 230 flights every day. But now, not a single one of those flights was possible. To make things worse, the assets that the company had were now frozen in multiple countries, with no cash coming in. The company had to start burning through their emergency funds. By April, the company was losing around $2 million per month. They tried to keep the company going by offering cargo flights and by positioning the remaining staff in different departments. However, in June, they had to fire 90% of their pilots and 70% of their staff. In addition to that, their main hub, Boryspil Airport near Kyiv, was severely damaged during the fighting. They tried to relocate some of their operations to Odessa, but that airport was also badly damaged. Eventually, the company ran out of money and had to stop all operations in September 2022. During its time in operation, Ukraine International Airlines was one of the largest carriers in Eastern Europe. They had a fleet of 40 aircraft with destinations all over the world. However, because of the current situation in Ukraine, the future of the airline is uncertain. As soon as the country opens its airspace again, UIA might be able to resume some of their routes, But due to the damage done to the airports in the country and the loss of skilled staff members, this won't be. If they manage to pull through this crisis, they will have to do it without the help of the government. When the company first approached them, the government wasn't interested in helping them, stating that they couldn't interfere in commercial matters. But this has changed recently. The Minister of Infrastructure announced that the state was working on a plan to help the airline resume its operations. One such plan is to help the airline to acquire new aircraft. However, which aircraft types they could get is still unknown. In 2019, they operated a mix of Boeing 737, Embraer 190, and Antonov N222. But since the outbreak of the war, all of those aircraft are gone. The safest bet would probably be to order some new Boeing 737 Maxes. And this also fits nicely with Ukraine's goal to become carbon neutral by 2050. However, this is only speculation, and the actual plans might be different. When Ukraine International Airlines was formed, it was the first airline in the country that truly had a vision of flying beyond the borders of Ukraine. Before that, airlines were either focused on flying domestically or had a limited number of destinations outside of the country. When UIA was founded, there was a real demand for international flights in Ukraine, and the people were ready to pay for it. But for UIA to succeed, they had to compete against well-established airlines from all over the world. Over the years, they managed to establish themselves as a good and reliable airline, and their reputation was good. But unfortunately, the conflicts in the area have made it impossible for them to operate. However, once the fighting stops, the work of rebuilding the country and the airline can begin. The biggest challenge for them will be to rebuild their network and try to win back their old customers. They will also need to hire new staff and to reintroduce themselves to the world. If they manage to do this, they might return to the success that they once had. But for now, their future remains uncertain. What do you think? Can UIA make a comeback after everything that has happened? Or is the airline dead forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this episode. If you want to support the work that I do, consider becoming a member. You can find the link to that in the description.